All right, here we go. Hello, Reem. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing well. How are you?
Thank you. I'm good. I'm good. I'm glad to have you today. It's great. I've been like seeing you on social media. I've learned about you through Vin. I wanted to have you on this podcast, so I want to reintroduce it really quickly. This podcast is called Dream for Data Rules Everything Around Me. The story goes very simple. I want to interview like people that I find inspiring and interesting in the data and AI field around three major questions. What's your story? Who are you? What's your mission and drive? And what's your vision of the future? So obviously, it's a great pleasure to have you
Sounds good.
today. Yeah, I hope we can deep dive into any kind of conversation. It's a free flow conversation we're gonna have, so let's try to have it fluid and simple as it can be.
Sure.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, thank you for having me, Jeremy. I'm really excited to be here, actually. I love the name of the
thank you,
podcast. I love the acronym and
thank
what
you.
it stands for. And I also love the name of NAS because I did tell you, and I guess you didn't know this, but that NAS means people in Arabic. And
Yeah,
even though
it's
you didn't know that, it's
beautiful.
actually quite relevant to what you guys do, right? So,
Yeah, exactly. Our
yeah.
mission is like literally to be able to build a universal data platform. So yeah, obviously people as a meaning
Yeah.
in Arabic was so great to catch, and thank you for bringing that up.
No,
I really
sure.
appreciate it. Cool. So yeah, basically the we'll go right now into like the full conversation that I want to have with you. And I always start with this simple question like who are you? And I'm excited to see how you present yourself because it's always a pleasure to see how people like introduce themselves in this simple question, and then we can just continue the conversation and see where it goes.
Yeah. Okay, sure. I feel like, we always, I mean, at least from what I've seen, have a tendency to kind of introduce ourselves through our roles in our career, right? And
Yeah.
I've been trying to kind of do that a bit differently lately. So I feel like more recently, actually, one of my newest roles and my most prominent ones has been becoming a mother. It's actually been 2 years.
Congratulations.
It's not that recent, but thank you.
Yeah.
So I always like to start by saying I'm a mom, because it's the majority of what I do today and who I am actually as a person. And I have a beautiful family. I live in Saudi Arabia, and
Okay.
I mean, who am I? There's a lot to me as a person, right? But I think, to kind of go into the context of our conversation, um, I'm someone who's always been curious on how things work and how things can kind of play a role and impact the things around you. And I feel like this was one of the main things that pushed me towards, where I am today in the field of data science. I didn't necessarily start in the field from the get-go, but I was somewhat, in the realm of tech from the very beginning, through my bachelor studies, etc. And it's always been
Okay.
driven by how do things work and just curious to see how things are built and how things make an impact in the world around us. Um,
Great.
so yeah.
Great. So you said you were not necessarily going in data science at first. What does it look like? I mean, who were you as
Yeah.
a child? How did you grow into the person you are today?
So I feel like I was very different people at different times in my life. I mean, I remember as a kid, I was very adventurous and very playful, and the last thing on my mind was, you know, uh, learning necessarily or being curious about science, etc. And I was more, exploring in the wild and going out on adventures with friends. And school was kind of like a social experiment for me. But then as I got older, and I remember that was somewhat around like high school, I started like really, really enjoying learning about science and specifically physics. So I don't know, kind of like an inner nerd came out, and I was
Hmm.
really fascinated by different topics I was learning in physics class, especially stuff related to electromagnetics.
Nice.
Um, so concepts like superconductors and magnetic levitation and things like that were things that blew my mind. things I never knew existed, etc. So this was, a straightforward kind of link to me deciding to go into electrical engineering in my bachelor's degree because I mean, for obvious reasons of it linking back to, this topic that fascinated me in school, which was electromagnetics, but also me being interested in, all the technology that I was using and going back to this idea of how do these things work? How do these things get built and how do they work together and how do they function? I mean, I'm using them every day and they're impacting my life every day, and I have no idea how they function. And for me, that was a bit annoying. So
Hmm.
that was kind of, what pushed me in that direction. And I majored in electrical engineering at the start. So more of, control systems, power systems, electric circuits and stuff like that. I
I
did
see.
get exposed to, fundamentals in software engineering, computer science, but nothing too deep. And then it was in the last year of university, I remember, where I somehow accidentally ended up in an AI course. And it wasn't like machine learning based. It was, those traditional AI algorithms like the A star search algorithms and stuff like that.
Hmm.
Um, and even though it was a bit kind of different than what we're learning today, or a bit, not necessarily like what's trending today, I got curious on, these techniques, and I also at the same time met a professor who was working in, I remember, natural language processing and context aware sensing, and I was like, whoa, you can do these things? I don't know where I was
Hmm.
living at the time, but for me and like my circle, AI was not a thing that people talked about. This was back in like 2014, 2015. So when I saw the work that this professor was doing, I was like, oh my God, like, how do you do these things, right? So going back to the same question, I was like, I want to know, like, this is super interesting. And that's how it started. That's how I got into the field. And then it was a couple
Interesting.
of years later that I actually realized, oh, this is actually a huge buzz. And somehow, I'm here and I seem to be in the right place doing exciting stuff. So yeah.
Cool. What comes to my mind when you talk about like electrical, magnetics and all that, like levitation, is something that also is super interesting to me. Like I was always fascinated by, like levitation of like materials. Like when you, I don't even have the word in English, but that the it's so fascinating to see like that everything is a wave at the end of the day. Like everything is like
Mhm.
moving, and we are all particles that are constantly moving, and the levitation and all that stuff.
Exactly.
It's like so interesting to be like, hey, do we do we know actually how we work? Like
Yeah.
how the body
It's
works?
interesting because
Like
it
how does
takes
all
you
those
down
part?
to like the fundamentals, right? It takes you down to
Yeah.
like the atomic level, and it's a
Yes,
fascinating field. I'm
exactly.
still a huge fan. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so powerful. I mean, that this is, I think that this is embedded in us as humans to be interested about that. I think so. I never saw any, like, I mean, to me, like when you talk about that stuff, obviously there is layers of us as humans where you build your experience on many different stuff. But those things, those questions, those fundamental questions of life and how things work, like everybody has that. Everybody kind of like, where do we
I
come
don't
from and
know.
so
I
on.
mean, I remember when I got into it and I was like, into these things and had conversations with people, I did not see a similar interest, honestly.
Yeah,
I
I see
mean,
what you mean, though. I
interesting.
see what you mean. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, not everyone. I mean, it depends. But I mean, a fun fact for you actually. So, I at the time when I was like doing electrical engineering in my college, I was doing it here in Saudi Arabia, and it was actually, anyways, I'll try to summarize the story. But I was the only female student in the class, um, with maybe like 10 other male students with me.
yeah,
And I remember everyone, finding it very odd first that I chose to do something like electrical engineering, which was a bit unusual, I guess,
I
in the
imagine.
community that I was in. Yeah, and also a lot of people, I don't know, they find it a bit of a field that they can't relate to, right? Because a lot of the concepts we study there are, things that you can't really touch and you can't really see. And I sense that people find a challenge in that to some extent.
Yeah,
But
yeah, yeah. I get your
yeah,
point.
it's fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah. And so tell me more about probably like how it is to grow up in Saudi Arabia. And because obviously from the exterior point of view that I have, Saudi Arabia is this country in the Middle East that has like a completely different thought process and way of working in terms of society, but that has recent like in the recent years it's been evolving as to a certain point where you have amazing universities coming from different places of the world. Like so many like stuffs got set up into Saudi Arabia. There's this like opening up that I know about the country that is um, uh, like constantly evolving. Can we stop on this? And what's your perspective on all of this? Like you grew up in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
You originally come from.
Yes, I was born and raised in Saudi.
Okay.
I'm not Saudi, but I was born and raised in Saudi, so it's home,
Okay.
you know. And
Okay.
um, I love being here because I love that I've seen, you know, the progression that has happened over the years. And I mean, today Saudi is the place you want to be, especially if you're in tech and you're in these, you know, fast-growing fields that are now, you know, changing the way that we live.
Yeah.
So things looked very different over the course of, you know, the past years. So growing up here, I mean, it probably was very different than you would expect. I mean, I know, you know, being on the outside, people have certain expectations. But I mean, it was I guess the main kind of cultural aspect that was different than today was kind of, you know, we have a culture where males and females are um, separated, right? So, for example, in
Mm-hmm.
schooling systems, females would study alone, males would study alone, at least on the most part. It was the same case in university as well. And it's
Yeah.
to date, by the way.
It
So
was
till
like that
today,
when my
it's
grandmother went to school, you know? So it's like not so
yeah,
far
yeah.
from whatever
So
we was happening in the other countries,
yeah, and I mean it still exists, right, in certain boarding schools, etc.
right?
So
Yeah,
this is something
yeah.
that's very common here. Um, and I mean, even though, so there are cultural aspects that are not necessarily related to Saudi. So there's just a cultural aspect that we have in the Middle East about maybe, or that we used to have, now it's changing a lot about like female roles in society, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so this is
Mm-hmm.
why I kind of tell you, you know, it was a bit odd that I chose to go into electrical engineering, specifically in my circle. It may not have been in any circle, but in my circle, I mean, I grew up in a family where, first of all, there were no engineers. So it was, it
Mm.
was, it was odd that I chose to do that, not just because I was a female, but because, you know, no one has done that in my family before. So why would you choose something that's so different than, you know, what everyone else is doing?
Yeah, comfort
Um,
zone.
yeah, exactly. But I
Mm-hmm.
mean, in general, um, there's a huge percentage of females in the Middle East that opt for STEM majors, right? And it's almost at the 50% mark that you see classrooms, you know, today that are 50% female, 50% male in STEM fields.
Wow, good,
So
good.
so yeah, I mean, it doesn't hinder. I haven't seen, you know, these cultural aspects hinder the growth of a female in whatever she decides to do in life, whether STEM or otherwise.
And I must say that
Uh,
probably like here in France, it's still 80% men and 20% women, maybe some kind of a ratio
yeah,
like this. So what the ratios that you are
yeah,
saying are pretty impressive. Like if it actually tells a
they're a
lot.
lot better. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think one of the main aspects is education is h- highly valued in our society.
Mm.
And there's a tendency to kind of push towards, you know, those fields that kind of give maybe parents the feeling of security, you know, like engineering or medicine or law
Mm.
or etc., right? So there's a
Yeah.
tendency to push in this direction where you feel like, oh, I can secure my kids a better future. Obviously, like that's not always the case, but this is a mentality that's quite common where I
Mm.
am.
Cool. And so, talking about education, so you're coming, like, I know from your background and from your LinkedIn profile, so you've been working in this field. Now you're more into the recruitment and automation and AI. And can you tell us about basically your mission all the way from this point where we discussed your childhood and how you grew up to now and what is motivating you on a daily basis, basically?
Yeah. So maybe I'll continue from a point I just mentioned, which is education is something that's considered of high value, not just in my society, but also in my family. So,
Mm,
I mean, I grew up as an immigrant. So in my family, there was always this idea that education is one of your um, biggest weapons in life, right? It's something that you can rely on. So pursuing my education was something that I held very highly. And I feel like it was one of the main drivers that pushed me towards going to graduate school and then completing my PhD, which I finished actually not that long ago, so around like 2 years ago.
mm,
And so it was, it was during my master's and PhD that I kind of dived into the details of machine learning and data science and getting really into the nitty gritty technical details and where my curiosity was kind of, famished to the work that I did and through the research that I did. It was also during my PhD that I co-founded a startup with two colleagues of mine that was
okay.
focused on AI education and trainings in the Middle East. So it stemmed from the idea of we don't believe there's enough awareness on AI and how powerful it can be for organizations and for individuals, to be aware of. And we kind of pushed from there and wanted to make sure that we were helping in democratizing this technology in our region. So this was something I did for almost the entirety of my PhD, so in parallel with my studies. And I've always been huge on education, whether for myself or others. And it's something that I also still try to continue to today, even though I'm no longer formally educating. But one of the reasons I try to share, for example, on LinkedIn is to educate, really. I mean, maybe in a bit of a different way, but out of the idea of I want to share my experiences with others and hopefully they can learn something
Nice.
useful out of it.
I see.
Uh,
Very good.
the shift, and then I took the shift, right? I mean, you mentioned recruitment, so yes, so I took the shift. For me, it didn't necessarily start as an interest in recruitment. It was more of me wanting to shift into, um, building products and pushing more on um, making an impact from a development perspective and building these products that would play a role in hopefully making people's lives better in a way or another. And it so
Mm,
happened that I came across, the Interview AI, which is the company, the startup I'm working with right now. And the recruitment aspect, I mean, when I was thinking of joining them and I still hadn't decided, I kept thinking, okay, why would I be interested in working on a problem like this? And just for context, so we build an AI interviewing solution, right?
mm-hmm.
There's more details into it, but I'll just leave it at that. So I kept thinking to myself, does this align with what I've always liked to do, right? And I thought what I always liked to do was educate people, but then I kind of thought, no, I have like a big picture in my head, which is I want to play a role in making people's lives better somehow. And for me, education for a long time was that method for me, right? So if I can teach people, hopefully I can make their lives better. But then I was like, in recruitment, if I can help design a solution that would potentially bring fair opportunities to individuals, then
I
I'm
see.
still sticking to that, to that ideal that I had, which is do something that makes an impact that's positive to others. So even though what we do at Interview AI is tailored for recruiters, for me, the true kind of driver behind it is the impact it will have on candidates and their experience in hopefully landing better opportunities in the market.
I get it.
Eliminating human biases and making sure that the criteria is fair and consistent, giving everyone a fair chance to represent
It's so
themselves and
relevant.
eventually,
Yeah,
yeah, I
it's
mean,
so relevant.
hopefully that's,
Obviously, like one of the things that frustrates me and scares me the most is the bias in AI. I mean, with my team, we
yeah,
start talking about it a lot. Like we are three white male Caucasian building a data and AI startup, right? So what the hell is that, right? It's like not really
yeah,
like I mean, this is the way it is, right? We just met up as we are like it's me, my brother, and Maxime, my CTO, but we were like contained in a small team. And now that we are opening up and try to grow the team, I'm always looking forward to like how can we have the most diversity in this, because
Diversify. Yeah.
it's biases all the way if you just recruit the same people like look like you, right? You don't have the true opportunity to experience stuff from different perspectives, and
No, I agree. I
that's a
agree.
problem.
It's really nice. It's great actually that you've even thought about that, right? Because most of us, I mean, I know this applied to me for a long time. I didn't realize, these biases that I had. I mean, first of all, I want to start by saying, we take bias as a negative thing. Bias is not, I mean, it's normal, right? It's we
Yeah,
have these
yeah, yeah,
biases in our head, and I mean, doesn't have to reflect that you're negatively biased against others. That's not the only meaning of bias, but we have this like mental model in our minds that was kind of integrated into us through the way that we were raised and the community that we grew up in, etc., which puts certain ideas in our heads and certain values and beliefs. And
exactly.
when it comes to decision making, subconsciously we imprint these beliefs and these values on the decisions that we make. And so if you end
Exactly.
up, yes, in a team, for example, of people who come from the same group, then you're not really considering other perspectives. If you I mean, you talked about AI being biased. I see it a bit differently. I don't see it as the AI being biased. It's the people,
This is the
right,
data
behind it.
sets.
Exactly,
Mm.
exactly. And so at least with AI, you have techniques that you can actually use to eliminate this bias out of the algorithms, out of the decision
Hmm.
making, etc. With people, I mean, you can barely even detect it sometimes, right? Obviously, like we can set certain criteria, etc., but
Yeah.
it's not controllable.
Hmm.
So yeah,
I
so this,
think that the
like, I know a lot of
idea,
people.
yeah, I was gonna say the idea is probably not the word bias is a bit like confusing. It's that for me, it's more like representative. Like whatever you try to do, if you want it to be fair, is it representative of whatever problem space you're looking at?
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah,
And I mean, in many
yeah,
cases, your problem space is the world,
yeah.
right?
We're living in
So,
a global village,
that's,
so welcome to the need for
yeah,
representativity into like any kind of like groups and stuff. Yeah, back in the days where everything was closed down and French were living with French, whatever. Like it wasn't the same.
it might have sufficed,
Yeah.
but now it doesn't work
Now,
anymore. I mean, I'll give you an
yeah.
example, like from the work that I do directly. So one of the things, I thought about at some point is what is the market that we're targeting so that, we kind of take into consideration that our solution is currently perhaps being tailored to a specific market, a specific culture. But that wasn't the case because even if you're working for a specific market, companies are recruiting internationally. So you're not even working with a specific group of people when you're, training these algorithms. You're really working on an
Mm.
international scale,
Oh,
right?
okay.
So it makes the problem a lot more challenging, and the reality of being able to make sure that your system, is fair and consistent across different cultures becomes, that much more difficult.
Can we stop on this? Can we talk about like how you design some system like this? Like, is there some high level like architecture that you would recommend or that you learn down the way that works better? So, there is a lot of questions around like, yeah, what's the stack basically? What are the steps in your workflow that ensure like, can we take the example of like your your main source data and how it goes to the end of the workflow?
Yes, so I will try to share things a bit on a high level just to,
Yeah, yeah. Just I
not
don't want to
accidentally
get
share too
into
much.
like the secret sauce of what you're doing or whatever. Just
No, no, I
understanding
mean,
the
no
big parts,
secret
right?
sauce. But yeah, yeah, I mean, it's so there's something that's on the ground today, and then there's stuff that's basically planned for making things better. So I think the main focus, at least so far, and I mean we're a bit young in our journey, but the main focus has been on making sure that our data source is, accurate enough. So our data source is rich enough, diverse enough to be able to encompass the different groups of people that we want to eventually be able to tailor for when evaluating, performance in interviews. And we started off with a framework. So this framework basically contains criteria for evaluating individuals on different, let's say, um, behaviors that they would display during the interview, right?
Mm.
And what we came to realize is that using one framework was not going to work, right? So using one rigid framework that was evaluating everyone on the same exact criteria had its hindering effects because we noticed that it was there was a distinction between how different cultures perceived um, different questions in the interview, right? And to give you more context, because I haven't mentioned this before, but we are today at least running behavioral type interviews. So we ask individuals about, tell me about a time when you had like a conflict with a colleague and how you dealt with it, right?
Oh, okay.
So we've noticed many instances where it's very obvious that, for instance, people coming from more of a Western civilization responded to certain aspects very differently than others coming from Eastern civilizations. It was
Yeah.
obvious. And it didn't mean that one group was wrong while the other was right. It just meant
No, it's
that
just
they
like
had
this.
different perceptions. Exactly, exactly. So we quickly realized that we need to take this into consideration. And this was an idea that for me was a bit new because I always thought if you want to be fair, you need to be consistent all the way through. But I then had a discussion actually with someone who has worked in the AI ethics space for quite some time. And he shared with me a statement which was very insightful. He said, if you assume everyone's the same, you're being biased against them because they're not the
Mm.
same. And you're not supposed to treat them the same way or evaluate them the same way. You need to account. So you need to account for the bias in your system. You need to encode the differences across cultures into your system. How? That's something we're still exploring. And I don't think
Oh,
there's like a
interesting.
straightforward right answer to that. But yeah, it was an interesting
Maybe
idea
I
that
can
never
add
crossed
my
my
two
mind.
cents on this. Yeah,
Yeah, please.
yeah, because like on what we do, which is basically building this AI system for businesses that connects content marketing, sales, ops, finance, open data, six basic engines. There is like
Hmm.
this idea of okay, there is a core thing. There's a stable stuff that everybody has, and then there's all those custom things that people can change. And so the hard stuff for us now is being like, what is core and what is custom? Like what is really the
Yeah,
fundamentals of life of the
that's
entity?
that's
Like what
super
is the stable stuff
relatable.
and what's the other?
Exactly, exactly, exactly. So for you, it's kind of like maybe different workflows across different organizations, right? And this could
Yeah.
differ maybe through organization size, organization industries, etc. For us, it's actually humans, right? It's a different candidate. What is
Mm-hmm.
core for everyone, and then what should be customized to fit each person's, background and experiences. So exactly same idea.
Yeah. And it comes down to some like very, very deep stuff that I love is like connecting dots basically. You need to
Hmm.
understand how you connect everything together. It's not anymore about putting people in boxes, what we've been told since beginning of childhood, I
Yeah,
guess. Like at school I
yeah.
was terrible. I was like, no, this connects to this connects to this, and people were like, no, 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 you don't understand, this is a specific topic, this is another one. I was never sold on this idea. So yeah, coming back to
Good for
AI and
you.
why it's, yeah, I mean, like, no way, I don't understand that. And so the idea of like connecting everything together comes down to like what are the fundamentals of each and every domain, and what is like the flexible stuff that you can, so it's kind of a coming back to the atomic level, right? The cellular, like the central cell, and then the whole like other stuff that connect with other cells, right? It's like
Yeah, yeah.
very, very fascinating for me to see that in represented it through data and everything. It's kind of fascinating. So I relate
It
a lot
is.
with what you're saying here.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting to see, the synergy between the two different, even though we're working on completely different things, but you kind of see it. You see it in different aspects. You see the need
Yeah.
for diversifying your solution, the need for being open to differences in workflows, differences in people, etc. And this idea of, you know, being able to, again, democratize this technology so that we can get to a point where it's actually properly functioning for the entire world and not just for a specific group of people.
Yeah, but you need to take into consideration that a one size fit all stuff not working.
No. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I mean, it was never a good idea, not just in tech, but I mean, it's refreshing to see this idea being highlighted over and over again across, history in different events and different, revolutions that are taking place.
Yes, I agree. I agree. Great, great, amazing. So this might be a way for us to move to like the idea of future and vision and where everything's going. Because like this idea of connecting everything together for me when I'm thinking about it, it's like yeah. So maybe our understanding of the world was so narrow for some time that we were just like opening up. It's like oh okay, so now everything into boxes because we as human can't understand like the interconnectedness of things and then this new AI word and everything like show us that not I'm really fascinated by those knowledge graph and how they are mapped to the language
Yes, I've
model
been
and how we
seeing
can
that.
just yeah
Yeah.
yeah it's kind of like we are exploring that like crazy nowadays and I want to like understand like what's so where do you see this thing going in terms of like probably first about as a as a person, uh, how do you see your child like in how do you imagine the interaction that your child will have with the technology? Because I have a kid as well, 2 year old, and then like
Ah,
yeah,
okay.
I'm visualizing, trying to visualize this is hard to me, but we are building as of as now. So what's your feel? What do you think?
Uh,
How do you envision the future interaction with technology that your child is gonna have?
I mean, I usually reflect on how I've seen things progress, at least from the history that we know and even within our lifetime, right? So you can see clear differences between, I mean, I'm a millennial, so you can see a clear difference between how I grew up and my relationship with tech versus, for example, Gen Z and how they interact with tech and how comfortable they
Yeah.
are with tech. And I
Mm.
mean, it's not about them, their use of the technology, but it's about the technology actually has become kind of like an integral part of their life and their character. And just maybe I'll share one incident that happened with me, which I found fascinating. So while we were experimenting with our interviewing solution, I would ask candidates, how their experience went being interviewed by an AI. And the majority of them would say, oh, I was a bit uncomfortable. I felt a bit awkward. I didn't, I usually like to have a person interacting with me, etc. But then when I would ask those from, the younger generations, they would say the complete opposite. They'd be like, it was so comfortable. I really liked that, I didn't see a person in front of me that was like judging me with their face expressions and I could speak freely and I really, really enjoyed it. And I was like, wow, like you can it's so interesting to see how humans adapt to things so differently. And I mean, even though as a millennial, I mean, I grew up in an age where tech was not part of my childhood for a long time, and
Yeah,
then it
same.
became a central part. But I guess there's something in the way that you grow, again, these mental models, right? So it gets ingrained in your mind. Versus my daughter who's growing up, and I mean, my daughter, I remember like she would be able to navigate my phone and like she would like remove my notifications because they're bothering her. She was not even like 1.5 years old. And I was like, what is this? This is insane. Like how
What
does
is
she know how to
this?
use this thing?
Mm. Yeah,
So
same. I have the same.
it's,
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, it's hard to kind of envision what things would really look like because we're at a time, right, where things are quite, at least in my viewpoint, I feel like we're at a time where things are very exciting. At the same time, there's a lot of hype about how much of an impact these things will have on our life in the short term. And I don't see that happening because even though, yes, the tech has evolved and there's amazing things that we're doing, the impact on, if we're talking on an organizational level, or the impact that this tech is having on um, the progression of society in general, I've seen needs a bit more time. Um, Things are not moving,
Yeah.
from what I've seen, as quickly as people say they are. Like, yes, a lot more
Yes.
people are aware, a lot more people are, playing around with this tech. But when it comes to the fact of making an impact and making a difference, right, it's a lot slower. And I think there are many reasons for that. But
Yeah. I get your
it's
point.
hard, yeah. Yeah, so I mean, it's hard to foresee how things would look like exactly, but I think at least for the next like 5 to 10 years, I don't see a drastic change in our relationship with technology more than just, making our life a bit more efficient. But thinking ahead into, how technology will be integrated into your life, maybe your home, etc. Um, it's Yeah, I feel like my daughter is going to be like somewhere in between, right? So she's going to
Mm.
be kind of like the advanced stage of where I was. Like AI is kind of her internet in a sense, for where I was as a millennial. And perhaps, my grandchildren's generation is going to be the one where they're really going to get into a lifestyle that's completely maybe different than what we see today, and how we're
Mm.
used to living our daily life.
Yeah.
This
Do
is kind
you
of like
do
the time
you
frame that I would anticipate.
I see. And you're I mean what you sort of serious motivated. Oh. I saw yeah, something happened. Siri got woke up in my computer. Anyway, yeah, I wanted to
She doesn't like what
yeah,
I was
yeah, yeah.
saying.
It's like, wait a minute, what are those guys doing? Um, yeah, I wanted to
Yeah.
ask because obviously Saudi Arabia is the place where NEOM project is going on, like this big line project, and so futuristic,
Smart
smart
cities.
cities and
Yeah.
and stuff. Like, yeah, so curious to get like how this is perceived in your culture, in your surroundings, with your friends in Saudi Arabia, like how you guys are approaching this change at a parent level, like and at a citizen level, basically, with all those like things going on in your country.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question because you're right. There's a lot of change that's happening and it's very fast paced. Um, Considering that no more than 5 years ago, Saudi was a very, very different place than it is
Mm,
now, right? And things have
yeah.
transitioned quite quickly. But on the most part, everyone's excited about the change, right? I mean, in my circle, I actually don't have that many parents in my
Mm,
friends group, so everyone is kind of psyched about this technology driven future and these new projects and this growth and this prosperity and kind of like envisioning how things will look like in the next 5 to 10 years. I personally have my conservations, especially becoming a parent. You kind of view things a bit differently, but not just as a parent, even for myself. I feel like I've reached a point where I enjoyed the fun stuff in tech for quite some time, but I reached a point in life where I feel like life has gotten too crowded, life has gotten too
mm,
quick, and it got to a point where you do lose touch with things that I think are essential for you being a human being and you living a healthy life. And I don't know if it's age or just time that at some point you feel like, oh, you've really gotten exhausted with this.
yeah.
I mean, talking about social media and the crowded space there, and how much
Noise.
information is out there and how much you get pinged and distracted. So much noise, so much noise. To think that even our environments are gonna get into gonna get integrated into this tech. I mean, I'm curious. I don't know. Like, I wouldn't say like I'm conservative in the sense that I would think these things are disadvantageous, but I'm curious to see how we will evolve as human beings, right? And how the way that we live our lives and interact with change. We've already seen so
Yes.
much change. The way we interact socially and the way we form friendships and the way that we prefer to communicate over a screen versus in person. Um, so these are where my conservations
Yeah.
come from, like the impact on society as a whole. But it's exciting stuff because just like there's like the exhausting part and maybe the negative side, there's also like a lot of positives that happened. I mean, being someone I have family in many different places in the world, tech allows me to connect with them, to stay, updated with them, to stay connected, etc. So as always, there's positives and negatives, and it really does come down to you as an individual and how you balance these things for
Exactly.
yourself,
Yeah.
right? And how you make
Yeah.
use of them.
To me, it's really like I'm obsessed only by how can I have more time in my real life, my, with my son, with my friends,
Yeah,
with going out. I like nature, going out, and like I'm feeling a bit like I need
yeah,
to fix this,
exactly.
figure out a way to like have things on autopilot and do my work, and just me being here as a
Yeah.
as an agent, like figuring out if those other agents that I programmed are doing the right stuff at the right time, and then I'm out. I'm out in the wild basically. So I
Yeah.
I can
And you can do that today. That's
yeah
an advantage, right? So you can automate, you can work remotely, you can connect with teams remotely and do your job and not have to be in an
yeah
office, 8 to 5 and not see your family all day, etc. So as I said, there's like positives, there's always like a positive outcome and, disadvantages that you want to navigate. Um, but
mm.
yeah.
So you feel like it's basically you feel like it's going a bit too fast and we don't have the time to just breathe a little bit and just look at what it is right now,
Oh yeah.
and but also excited about what this might become in the future if we take the stuff in the right way, like if we prioritize our health and our human relationship, this can actually be beneficial and not so like yeah
Exactly? I mean, it boils down to how you make use of
yeah
this, the innovations and the tech that you have
yeah
at hand, just like
back to
everything else.
education
Yeah.
then we need to educate people on how to use those tools so that they can help really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, one of the factors that I think is impacting, the value that's currently being taken from the, recent hype of tech is people are not, in my opinion, educated enough,
Oh,
and
100%.
people, don't. They're not they don't they listen to someone who says this worked for me and they assume it's going to work for them, and it really doesn't work that way, right? And this lack of um, awareness and enough education on the topic is leading to a lot of issues, and I think this is one of the major factors
Mm,
among other things for the
I agree.
impacts that we're seeing today.
Well, I think it's perfect way to close the conversation and end this thing smoothly. We've been talking about a lot of interesting stuff, Reem.
Yeah,
I'm super glad that we did that. Uh, uh, yeah,
same.
it's
Thank you,
been great.
Jeremy. It's
Yeah.
been a pleasure.
So where can we like reach you? Like if someone is interested in talking to you, what's the best place to go? Yeah.
LinkedIn. I'm there
Okay.
most of the time. So, you can reach me on my LinkedIn. I'm happy to chat and,
Cool.
throw ideas.
All right. Thank you so much for your time. And hope to
Thank
see
you
you
for having
around.
me. Enjoy the
Thank you.
rest of your
Thank you.
day.
Uh,
For sure, for sure. Good
thank
luck
you.
with everything.
We'll keep in touch. See you.
Take care. Yeah. Bye bye.